So to run up our opening segment, it's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, who is really well known from many of you, our incredibly committed UNODC Goodwill Ambassador for the global fight against human trafficking, Ms. Mira Sorvino. So Mira, we're very, very happy that you can join us today and deliver, no doubt, some very, very strong and vibrant remarks.
Thank you so much, Delphine. I hope, can you hear me? Just want to make sure because we did not check my mic.
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Good morning, everyone, excellencies, fellow advocates, survivor leaders, ladies and gentlemen. As you may or may not know, I have been working to fight human trafficking since 2004, and I have been working in concert with UNODC in my current position as Goodwill Ambassador in the global fight against human trafficking since 2009. And the way that the fight for me really became a crucial calling in my life, I was introduced to human trafficking as a subject of violence against women in my work with Amnesty International as their Stop Violence Against Women campaign spokesperson. And I learned about human trafficking and was horrified by the concept of it. But when it became real and undeniable and a call for me was when I started interviewing survivors and being moved at a soul level by their words and their experiences, their lived experiences. I looked into their eyes, I heard their words, and I felt a call that could not be denied. There was no way I could look away any further. And since joining with the UN and, being honored to be part of the planning session that, created the Global Plan of Action, that created the UN Voluntary Trust Fund for Victims of Human Trafficking, which is such a worthy way for people who want to get involved, who are listening to this today, to contribute to services, direct services on the ground for victims and survivors the world over. All of those things were incredibly heartening. And I have to say, I expected a swifter change on the ground once the world started understanding about the crime of human trafficking. I thought once people knew that it existed the way all of a sudden I knew throughout the latter half of the aughts that it existed, and what terrible numbers it comprised and how it was growing, and that we may have upwards of 40 million people living in bondage today, both labor and sex trafficking. I really expected more change more swiftly. And I think the only reason that I can say that I can really, besides the immense profitability of the crime, besides the sort of relative impunity for the perpetrators compared to other major crimes, I believe that the reason that there's not more action and more reduction and more solutions is because the survivors heretofore have been a silent community, not given access to addressing the world, so people would really understand on a visceral level that slavery is alive and well, and that people are being denied all of their basic human rights, all of their hopes and dreams shattered, right under our noses in every country across the world. And I think it's because this community, up until now, has not been a political force, has not been a constituency that major political candidates or parties have worried about them as a voting bloc, have worried about them as the squeaky wheel that gets the grease. They have not been a priority for really any country on a massive scale, even though the laws have been written. They are in place now in most countries. They are growing. The understanding of the laws is growing, but the political will and the galvanization of the civil society actors and the partnerships that need to be built hasn't really happened yet. And I feel that the incredible wisdom and lived experience and bravery of survivor leaders across the globe can change that. Because I think once their voices are amplified and really heard on an international global scale, their existence in that heretofore marginalized space where their cries were unheard, their suffering unnoticed, their labor exploited, and we all enjoy the fruits of it, their bodies exploited as a form of recreation, without a real soul understanding that lives are being decimated across the world. If we amplify those voices, if we put them front and center of everything we do, just like I was struck and taken by the fact that I had to do everything I could to join this fight, I think the general public and government actors and civil society actors and the private sector will be compelled at a soul level to respond to the undeniable truths and knowledge and guidance and wisdom that these survivor leaders have to offer. Survivors are among the most brave humans that I have ever met, and the most generous, because I'm sorry, if I went through years of being held against my will in an employment situation, barely earning any money, being under threat of violence to myself or my loved ones all the time, being beaten or seeing people killed in front of me or being raped thousands of times over years, I don't know if I would have the interest. I'd like to think I would, but with that kind of complex trauma, would I say, okay, I'm out now. I've exited myself, or I've been helped to exit myself. I'm going to now stay focused on this rather than moving on and leaving that all in my rearview mirror. I don't know that I could do that. I don't know that I could face it every day, but they do. And they want to leave no one of their sisters or brothers behind. And they wake up every morning having suffered experiences that most of us can only dream of how difficult they would be. And they soldier on, and they grow, and they blossom, and they heal, and they share, and they give love to their community and to others beyond it. So the thing is, we who have power, we at the UN, we in the governments here, we in the advocacy groups, we must invite them to the table every time there is a microphone. We must invite them to the table every time there is a planning session for a piece of legislation. Case in point, recently in California, I was alerted by a KBUC from CAST, Coalition to Abolish Slavery and Trafficking, that somehow in the COVID relief budget that California was creating, the California legislature and the governor, Gavin Newsom, this multi-billion-dollar budget included no emergency COVID relief funds for victims of human trafficking. And there are there's 21 direct service providers that normally receive regular funding for human trafficking victims. And just last year alone, CAST during the pandemic served 1,600 people in LA County alone. And their experiences during the pandemic were dire. Job loss, having to be housed with their trafficker longer than they would have been if there were not a lockdown, the loss of the kind of discovery mechanisms that, you know, people would generally be able to detect their situation sooner, housing insecurity, food insecurity, children being stuck at home on the line all the time, children being stuck with their abusers. The list goes on and on about the way they were impacted, and many of them work in the informal economy, so were not able to receive unemployment assistance, and then were far more likely to be re-trafficked. Even if they had exited, they were more likely to be sucked back in because they had no means to support themselves. And yet somehow in our California budget, there was no money allocated for them, even though there were a tremendous number of other special interest groups who were getting funding. So I started working with politicians, but the first thing I said is like, do we have some survivors who can come here and help us with this? Because I don't think we can do this without them. So we went on a television show, The Issue Is, and we brought Jenna McKay, who's the founder of the Jenna McKay Foundation, a survivor of sex trafficking. And she implored the governor and the state legislature to not turn their backs on this community who was the most impacted by the pandemic. Then I wrote an op-ed alongside Assemblymember Miguel Santiago, and we included the words of a woman who had been living in her car, hiding from her sex trafficker with her 3 children below the age of 5, who he had threatened to kill because there was no room in a shelter because the COVID restrictions had made capacity almost like non-existent. And then we held 2 press conferences where the incredible survivor leader, Angela Guanzon from the Philippines, and I loved what the representative from the Philippines said. Thank you so much. There's such powerful words. But she came out, a labor trafficking survivor, and explained how her community was impacted and what they needed to heal and what they needed to prevent further trafficking. And all of their words combined moved the hearts and minds of the elected leaders. And all of a sudden, we got 30 million over the next 3 years for this most deserving of communities. But it would have been impossible without these direct pleas and explanations from the people most affected by the situation to the leaders for them to be counted as people who were worth the time to move a little bit of the billions into their category. And that has to be done at every level. Anything to do with human trafficking has to involve survivor leaders. They know what they need. They know what they've been through, and they know what the solutions are. And we can't be paternalistic and think that we know better. We don't. We need to be guided by their expertise, their wisdom, and their humanity and their bravery. You know, one of the things that always irked me the most in my entire life is the otherization of people, whether it be by based on gender or ethnicity or religion or race. You know, the otherization that allows people to treat someone else as less than human, allows genocides, allows rape, allows segregation and discrimination. But human trafficking victims are the ultimate otherized people. They've been turned into mercantile products, service providers, simply, not humans who are given empathy by their traffickers or by the people who buy their bodies, but also by the general public. Like, we have stood by, the world has stood by as slavery is at an all-time high in the history of human civilization. But let's look at our cultural, you know, things that we think we hold dear to us. In the Judeo-Christian tradition, I'm Christian, many of you may be from that tradition, I believe in all of the Abrahamic religions. You know, Moses is a very important figure. He led his people out of slavery. That is considered a monumental thing. The survivors of today are the modern day Moses. The survivors of today need to be at the forefront of doing this incredibly heroic and aspirational thing, taking this gigantic millions and millions and millions wide community in the world and leading them out of slavery. And by giving them that visibility, by giving them that amplification of their voice and that seat at the table, only then will the collective hearts and minds of the whole world start actually not marginalizing them, actually looking to really fight those root causes, the prevention, not only the triage that comes after we discover them. And this is the way, just like in talking to those first 2 survivors I ever met, and my heart was broken and I was at this gut level just drawn in to fight what had been done to them. This is the way that we will all be able to start surging towards real change. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mira. Sorry.